Compression, Impression, Depression. 10,000 Words by John Riley. Right from the start, some mention should be made of the formal rigor of these poems. Each of them is exactly 100 words. For a formal poet like myself, the limitations imposed by accepting a given structure are more than balanced by expansion in unexpected directions. When one line must rhyme with another, many of one's thoughts must be discarded. Yet, at the same time, other thoughts are suggested merely by the available rhymes, causing one to change one's trajectory, causing the poem to expand in unforeseen directions. Granted, that associative reach for rhymes is not operative here, and so the form-imposed limitations are more weighted in the direction of compression. In fact, that compression comes to seem almost the theme of many of these pieces. One cannot waste words here, and gradually the meat is cut away right down to the bone or the stone. One needs to be very careful not to say too much when talking about this book. Too much would prove far more of a betrayal than too little. I have no doubt that there are those critics whose considered opinion is that the book itself does say too little. To those addicted to backstory, to obsessive psychological embroidery, to political context, to narrative distraction, these short pieces will never, so to speak, deliver the goods. But for those who believe that poetry is most often found in undeliverable goods, this book may prove to be the perfect manifesto for their willfully empty hands. It's as if John Riley has discovered not just what it means to read between the lines, but also to live between or beneath the lines. And though I am sure he would object to the attribution of any special wisdom to his work or his person, still, the very humility that allows these poems to flow through him bears witness to a wisdom that both begins and ends in the unconscious. Wisdom, after all, may be no more than a handful of stones, soon scattered by ever-changing circumstances. How precious, then, are these poems that they can fix for a seemingly endless moment what is endlessly changing. They are like footprints, then, marks made in passing, empty and yet so distinctively shaped. They are shapes that face their own absence, not so much impressions as depressions. Indeed, it could be argued that there is plentiful evidence of depression here. There is certainly plenty of death, many of these poems taking the form of an underworldly journey. And depression, in its most basic definition, is a pressing down. Eschewing sentimentality, these poems tap into far deeper reservoirs of emotion, and they draw the reader down with them into their depths. Jungian analyst Marie-Louise von Franz posited that in psychological depression, one is being pushed down into one's psyche to retrieve a part of the self that has disappeared from consciousness. Now, while such a metaphor may seem fanciful to someone ravaged by depression's grip, the image still provides a powerful way of looking at such archetypal descents. Journeys in search of what, as von Franz puts it, may well turn out to be psychically prized pearls once they are brought to the surface. Many of these stones seem like such pearls to me. Yet these pearls on the page quickly vanish when I try to hold them in my mind's hands. They slip through my grasp, just as the deep feelings they arouse fall right through my heart. But perhaps I have already said too much. The fact that one can embark on such an underworldly journey while simply sitting at one's desk in the apparent paralysis of composition is one of the great mysteries that sustain any practitioner of the imaginal arts. As Fernando Pessoa wrote in his Book of Disquiet, direct experience is an evasion or hiding place for those without any imagination. Despite their apparently hermetic qualities, these poems expose much that is customarily hidden by hiding all that is unnecessary to their strange grace. Just a quick note about how we're going to proceed. We are all, John included, going to read our chosen selections in sequential numerical order, that is, in the order in which they occur in the book. This may create an uneven spacing of readers and some seemingly arbitrary groupings, but in the spirit of formal rigor in which the book was composed, it seems appropriate to hold to such a predetermined design for the readings. The readings may be interrupted by comments from the readers or from the listeners, but they will hold to the general current running from 1 to 100. I'd also like to thank in advance all of our readers: John Riley himself, Cameron Clark, Andrew Mandelbaum, Wendy Vidalesk, Matt Quinn, Walter Ancaro, Meg Tyler, Marcia Karp, John Marcus Powell, Gary Lilly, and myself, Arnemo Hill. So let's start with number 1, read by the invisible Cameron Clark.
Thank you, Nemo. Is my audio good? So I need to check that.
Fine.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. Well, Nemo advised, I will not say much before reading these poems, but I would like to say firstly that I was very excited that I got this one. I was allowed to read this poem particularly because I maybe a little ill-advisedly read this as something of an ars poetica on John's stony aesthetic. Okay, let's do it then. 1, which stone? Is it 2 steps to the left and then a loop with his right foot pressed down carefully on the next stone washed by the rapid stream? Or is it 1 step to the left to allow his right to reach the stone without making a loop? Other alternatives seem just as local. He's frozen yards away from the creek side. He had been warned to follow instructions. Tonight, in this stream, the wandering stops, he was told. But now he struggles to remember his next move, here in the rushing water, alone, inexorably fragmented above fragmented stones. I think that's a terrific final line. And although Nemo says that there is these are not sonnets and they do not have rhyme, in at least 2 of the poems I am reading, I've identified ending couplets, and I am maybe again ill-advisedly reading the entire sequence as something a bit like the great sonnet sequences written in English, and I think I've grown much pleasure from reading these poems in such a way.
Number 2 is Bone. John, the book is gorgeous. I remember so many of these poems as they were workshopped, and I loved them then. But as a kind of a synergistic unit, it's amazing. Number 2, bone. He has no need to pull up and search for those last bits of bone. There's little chance of finding any. Splinters may have tempted a fox or been flown away in the beak of the crow nesting above the fig bush. Perhaps he should search closer to the well house. His feet will leave deeper prints in the soft soil there. Why wonder? He has no cause to search for the bones that fell from the scaffold that once stood in the oak's shadow. He can go now to the coast and watch his moments concentrate sunlight on the sea.
Number 5, centuries. A woman with an ancient face comes to him. Her voice puddles in the bowl she holds before her. Come, she says, dip your hands into forever. Sink your feet to where worms plow new homes. He lays his head on her amber shoulder. The darkness comes and the trees wander away. When he turns to follow the moon, she gives him a torch and turns him from the forest. He wanders and wanders, and still the song she sang sounds in his head. No death in her song, no tortured gathering of murderous crows, no accumulation of brilliant tears.
Number 7, rivers, no. There have been too many poems of rivers, even of twin rivers that run like furrows plowed by the invisible hand that molded mountains into the clouds. Today we will not go to rivers, currents bouncing into whiteness out of the dark and shallow waters, to where the soft land opens and the streams begin to float toward the giant gulf that will be their end. We will turn downward instead, into the subterranean world. Though there are rivers here too, much slower rivers full of torsos bobbing pointlessly, absent-minded smiles on their faces, consumed by the connivance of centuries. And number 9, as if it were a stone. The sea itself, the old sailor thought, is the translating craft. It's the time it takes to open the sails each morning, to gather new time in billows through the dazzle of new days, birdless dawns, sailing beyond the horizon solo through more full sails than are countable. He's no counting man. He's empty of measurement, and it takes him until now to understand alone, with no hunger, in the lope of Pacific waves, to realize that a way home, when home is still possible, requires him to stand at the bow and search for the illusion of a point.
10, victory. Still dead, he smells dead horses, fresh dung, hears the screams that linger in the fading sunlight, the ones that float with the smell of sweet courage torched, its acrid smell lying over the emerald surface of the dead lake. In the deeper distance, the string of a black river falls from flowering hills. He is unlike the charred and twisted bodies, arms forged into supplication, and the horses, still alive, bridled by the crumbling heat. He watches himself emerge from dust, freed finally from love of the arrow, heading into the hillside birches growing white as next winter's snow.
"11. Leaving the last house. During this time of life, the question has always been, do you have any questions? It is important to listen to the notes in all that is said. And at night he hopes the music is not lying about the cold. The fog of breath, the slight creak of knuckles when he balls and unpulls his fists, this is what sustains him. It is time to leave when the notes become words, moral words with peasant hips, spoken by women with extended hands. Then he hurries out the back, around the corner, across the rock garden, to the single oak.
12 more stones. How long has it been since he forgot all those things he should know? But what he should know is not a thing, he says out loud. Yet there is no one to listen. And when the teachers took turns telling him all the things he should know, he sits in his chair in the center of the room and thinks only of stones and how they are all shaped differently, everything locked up inside, all of the stone beneath their stone surface locked inside. And he wonders if the stones ever dream of being free before the water turns them to dust.
Hole in the sun. He reads that a hole in the sun is growing in the sun and tries not to think of rivers. Yet when he closes his eyes in hopes of sleep, it is mere seconds before rivers flow. He watches the eddies lap the small stones. It's never a rapid river, and for this he is grateful. But now that he knows the sun's plight, it is his duty to think of its wide wound. He promises himself he will ignore the dark waters when he closes his eyes, that he will dream instead of a fire digging through the sun with a drum.
"24. Copernicus. He orders a beer from the motherly waitress and thinks of what it might be like to yell, 'Serving woman, bring me your stoutest ale.' If he had lived centuries before, would he have been a warrior with the grim knowledge buried in his ignorant heart that soon the arrow would be for him? Or would he have been the faith of a city, full of glowing ambitions, working to gather the wherewithal to make them happen? An intelligent man in heroic orbit, when faces were shiny with meat grease, dreaming of musical time and towers, making nearsighted observations of Mars.
25. Trains. Alone on the porch, watching college students sprint to the top of the hill, then turn toward the park, spring sun sinking, the weather desired, amiable breezes pushing him to think of racing the final train, the train unleashed, speeding through stops, over trestles, signalmen diving, lantern lights swinging, always concerned, but never enough, that the molten red rails will buckle, the train will take a flyer off a mountain or slam into a station, cars flying over cars, the conductor crushed, aware all along that he is obsolete, left there to envy the students running up the hill for beauty.
"27 seasons. It isn't only the heat that keeps her shiny. Not any longer. She's healthier now. She no longer has to walk the fine borders of sleep, filming herself in mirrors, seeking evidence that she is real. She has all the necessary lives down, the ones out there for different times of day, and the one that flits from poplar to oak to pine. No one is invited to join her when she dances. No tree holds her tight. No limbs keep up with time. She refuses to think of winter when a cold hand will try to cleave her apart.
"30 consequences." I've always thought that John has a particular genius for movement and describing movement in his work, and I think this one, of all the poems in the book, evokes that brilliantly. 30 consequences. They wait a long time for him to die, then turn and go their ways as he goes his. At first, the townspeople pat each other on the back, but soon the gathering grows quiet, pensive. He goes in the other direction. All in all, it is tiresome being dead, his blood drained out with deep cuts in his femoral arteries, but not much different than before. It could have been worse. He could be carrying his head as he trudged up the side of the first range of hills, trail dust barely stirring when he lifts his weary feet.
You're muted, Andrew.
34, Dragonfly and Crow. We're left by the fire after the boss stands at the flame's waving edge, wearing black suit and immaculate boots, telling us about the dragonfly and the crow which have bedeviled his every moment since the fire's first spark, and how he's found a solution and will soon be free of their cruelty, how he, the boss, will soon pull off their wings and grind them into dust. Then he turns, the boss, and runs into the flames. We join hands before spreading blankets on scorched grass, opening bottles of cold beer, sharing figs fatter than those in eternity.
First Carp and then Riley. Lear, upon first meeting the disguised Kent, "Dost thou know me, fellow?" Kent, in disguise, "No, sir, but you have that in your countenance which I fain would call master." Lear, "What's that?" Kent, "Authority." Not only in their shared countenance, which but slowly entered into my realm of attention, those boxes that exist because one God an eternity ago decided that all things needed borders, but more so in the freight of what is contained there, do I find John Riley's authority. Not a thing, no matter how inward or odd, is within these fenced pastures, frivolous or unconvincing, but are here pressed into sense and sorrow, self-justified, and not only self-contained. 35, borders. Where well-armed guards, each with his weapon slung across his back, held into place with the stretched skin of the last man who thought we could be stopped or captured and imprisoned in the holes they dug, or wrapped in a hollow tree with thick vines and broken chains. Fools they were. Our weapons are the most powerful, our bullets the fastest, our sight unmatched, our nerve cold as the winter ice that we crack with ancient stones, to drink our fill on mornings after we've wiped our weapons with fine oil and cooked our latest catch over smokeless fires.
"39. Even small deaths demand songs. Are all savageries softer in the morning? Or is this only true for we who burn memories, the way temple keepers burn incense for a traveler whose mind is full of the snows that block the mountain pass? In this dark, nothing but stones can guide our way. By low light, we see the traveler lingering inside the killing barn, but we are too far away to see if there are ribbons in her hair, or if it's held back from her forehead with a thin band, spotted with tiny glass beads that fail to shine in the stall's shadows. "41. Bedtime. When he sleeps on the suspension bridge that hangs between the halves of my town, the river below, the one that moves like a tired clock, is brown or sometimes black, and is all he has for a pillow. He has been told his face looks like a boiled potato ready for mashing, but all he asks is what could make the river stop flowing. What words could be said? What force could appear? What would vanquish the soft myth the river makes? A myth made of the bluebells that listen to the songs he whispers through the steel grate.
"52. Night swimming. I once lived where night was the ocean of the world, where if I wandered the pasture in the glow between sundown and dark, toads came out and began their dance. The crickets made a stereo of sound, and excitement sat on my head like a crown. Have you ever spent time in an old pasture where mixtures of light fill your insides like lava? You are a swimmer in the bluing light, through the fence, past the barn where the mules and ponies need no feed, where all you think is, this may be my last moment on earth.
"54. All fog is gray. As he moves deeper into the room, toward the barred window, the door he'd passed through begins to slip away. The room is in a house in a town beside mountains with ragged peaks. When he reaches the window, the door has vanished. If he ever considers leaving, he must first remember the door is gone and accept that he must seek it out. The acceptance of necessity is the most difficult part of a task. Satisfied to find the window, he takes a breath. The fog begins to thicken and the peaks begin to fade. The fog is gray.
"60. Night bells. The chimes of the bells have ended and the night has thickened. And all around, the limbs of the magnolia are bouncing. The wind continues to pick up until the world stands still and braces against its assault. But the world is wrong. The world is so often wrong. We have made our own circle, me and the trees and their dancing leaves. All the trees are smiling, and down the street, windows are rising, and new faces fill the expanse, and we all sing the same song, and even the bells lift their weary tongues and clap new chimes."
Okay. Before I read, I just want to say thank you. I'm not very articulate about this. I'm actually kind of nervous and shy about it. So I don't have a great elaborate, poetic thing to say. I'm just really grateful to Nemo for doing my book, and I'm really grateful for you guys being here. And I'm just really grateful. Thank you. 67, light. The sun is blasting my scrabbled expanse, and I cannot breathe. I traveled here with no star, no map, no direction, only the guidance of the first words and the determined straightness of my feet. The dark is behind me now. I am cast into this light that cuts through my skin. I will never be able to continue this way. My feet are cracked and my hands bleed. Now, a vigil in this exterminating light where everything is known, everything is seen, everything can be experienced until the light, the known light, pours through the final thread of darkness. 68 hands. Standing on the hill each evening, after a day of possessing and dispossessing, there's nothing left to be done but first to wave your arms toward the full distance, and then to stare toward the bottom of the hill, the feet of the old hill, which seems surrounded now by the wave of what may be hands billowing up and down at a steady pace. It's impossible to feel certainty standing on top of this hill, unmovable the way yesterday is unmovable, craning the neck, bending forward to feel the soft lift wind arising from the waving hands.
69, lambs. He is 100 years old on the day he's born and lives the second 100 years with his lambs in a pasture, though he prefers those few who stop eating and walk slowly to the dry or muddy barnyard, soundlessly gazing back toward the remainder of the small flock still grazing in the fenced pasture. Such gazes promise nothing for lambs who learn nothing on their long journey through the firelight tunnel from the slopes of Mount Olive to the Mount of Corruption, to this place where, if you close your eyes, you see only lambs staring across the barnyard.
71, street. I'm scheduled to explain the odors of flowers, yet I hide in a house to avoid the listeners. They are gathering outside along the street, mothers, daughters, several sons, 2 or 3 fathers, some horses, wagons, one hauling a Gatling gun. They're all hungry. There's a dog needed to scout provisions. Another dog squats at the base of the oak, squirrels flitting overhead. I watch them through my window, milling about, lost and lonely, and so blind in their small circle. The old man, their leader, leaning 7, maybe 9 inches to their right, hand resting on his son's shoulder. '73, Blinken. After his resurrection, the dogs begin to play. They run through the house. I'm sorry. After I have dogs in my house, I'm always thinking about dogs. After this resurrection, the children begin to play. They run through the house with brooms between their legs. I'm a bigger witch. I'm older and uglier and meaner. On the street below his window, men and women wait with cameras and phones. He has a clipboard with a list of unanswered questions. The crowd continues swelling and the flash bulbs are ceaseless. At dusk, the children on the street take out silver balloons that seem to multiply as they spread among the crowd. An agreement is reached not to release the balloons until morning. Near midnight, the cameras finally stop blinking.
'76, away. He is not a slave of the sword. No violence, no nailed words spit across campfires tatter his cape. The dark is not full, he learned as a child, and he has spent no time trying to fill it. He spends no time filling anything or anyone and protects his well of emptiness as though it were gold. He sits alone in his room in the attic of the old house. One window looks out over a sea of waving trees. There is nothing in the trees to see, except the way they lean away when the wind rushes forward.
78. 78 apartments. The woman who lives on the first floor once loved dancing naked for her lovers. Now she is acquainted with winter days that never turn from gray. The girl who lives in the apartment above never sings when her lover visits, but when she is alone, she sings with a voice that clings to its lightness. When the lover leaves, he hurries downstairs and the door of the old apartment building bangs shut. Then the woman on the first floor stops all her chores and sits at her dining table with 2 chairs and waits for the girl to sing.
'83, Temples. I take the crack of my old bones, the ceased flowing of lost ambitions, wrap them around the final field to build a temple in which I will store masks, rotten cloaks, the last rusted armor. From the front, I set the fire which frees me for a walk across the lake that masks the silver bed where fish have swept the years along with forward faces and sideway glances. I am older now than all the gods and newer than the screams of all the sheep, the blood that flows through every temple, the song of sirens singing home.
John Marcus, you gotta unmute yourself. That's it.
Okay. Right. So in my blurb to this book, I said, if you read one of these poems, you want to read all the rest. The implication being that this writing is addictive. Addictive because of the strength and the bareness of the poetic statement. Not resorting to many, well, similes or metaphors, John expresses what he needs to say. And as is the way with poetry, often more. So I'm going to read number 90, Heaven. To me, this is concerned with the bureaucracy of established religions. I think every one of us will come up with a different interpretation. Heaven. Heaven is a border that exists because one God an eternity ago decided that all things needed borders. How else can infinity be realized without borders to point across and say, that is not infinity? This God's wisdom, and no one now knows which God it was, thus spoke. Borders? How can the infinite be boundaried? The angels are trapped now in a paradise that's no longer a paradise because its wall presses against them, regardless of how distant it is. The border is everywhere, the residents know. And this narrows the joy of those who are not gods. And now, number 92, I knew her. I think this is concerned with the love affair we wish we'd had when we were younger. when we were less lucid, but more virile. I knew her. We met in the theater. I did the lighting. She ran lines in bed. During the day, we drank. She's coming back to me. She said I was a fake. Her shoulder blades angled like swords that will never cross. And I think this is right. One night, she told me to leave. My hands were full. She opened the door. We knew we would end, but I never knew she would get lost in the mind of a man who best recalls her saying, "You fucked the life out of me." One night in the dark before we fell asleep. And now, 95, note. Now, this is about suffering and fear and enslavement and war and the possible way to get out of it all. Note. In the bright light of a late afternoon, the villagers come out of their homes and the forest dwellers emerge from vine-bordered woods that haunt the villagers with vast expanses and endless darknesses they cannot understand. They're waiting now, all of them, for the arrival of the letter they all long for. They've agreed on this day one will not kill the other, nor take their family as slaves, while they await the note said to be so full of suffering that all their own suffering will end once they rip open the envelope and sing out the words inside.
97. Banishment. Why must I die each time I cross the dry plain and climb the slope, there to place on the precipice the dregs of my discontent and loss? These are not the thoughts an eagle has, nor does the eagle fret about banishment each time he finds a place to make his home. He'll mate, perhaps in a fury of feathers, then will release his grip, returning to the ledge that's now his heaven, to watch the thickening night, alert to any danger, alive in his stillness, with no need of a halo of grace on his ledge of contentment.
Thank you, John, for this invitation. Your book is beautiful. 98, contours. Oceans have no sides, only contours, which may mean, I almost wrote must mean, all things once moved by magic now have no need to exist, not created by the container in which they rest. The smallest poplar grows away from its roots, the deeper those roots dig into the soil. Tonight, when twilight begins to fill the thicket of trees and vines, and the field grass softens into brown as it glides up from the brackish creek, a covey of quail blusters into a cloud of white, brown, and black, all with traces of blue on their leonine necks. '99, the glow. Here is a garden with a short wall made of white stones. Inside, the rows lie measured apart, each planted with crops we never touch. There is a brook and there is a tree, and beyond a relentless glow. The small girl lives in the cage hanging from the tree. She's grown, and so the thinner upper limb is beginning to bend. She must be lowered to a sturdier limb. First, there'll be discussion. Who'll perform the task? Who'll help? And how much information will be shared with the child? It is a task we each want to avoid. 100, free labor. He labors every day with hoe and spade, hour by hour, even when no task is there to curtsy before him, like the last girl he knew before he came here. Before he walked the rock-strewn hill miles, bent forward at the waist, weary head pressed against the endless magic of the wind. The tomatoes have rotted on the vine. The peas are dried and dead. The potatoes full of blind black eyes in the ground. He holds and chops, head full of the glory of ground cracking beneath his blows. Rocks avoided, bees swirling as the day drifts towards its end.
Fantastic, John.
Thank you. Again, I want to say thank you. I'm a little nervous. I've never, I'm nervous. But it was a beautiful reading, and listening to you guys read it made me sort of connect to it again. You know how it is when you do a book, you read it so many times but you just got to, everybody's reading helped me feel it come back again. And I really appreciate that, because I really enjoyed writing. And thank you.